Salutations, my friends, and thank you for tuning in to another edition of Crisis Corner. I've actually titled this one Chimeric Creatures and Children simply because, yes, we are going to be looking at the fact that chimeras are existing. Yes, motherless children definitely exist as well. Yes, we are living in a transhuman age. We are living in the days of Noah, and yes, they are trying to bring back the Nephilim. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. And I'm sure you're wondering, well, what's the difference between the previous episode of Crisis Corner where you talked about things like in vitro gametogenesis and whether or not that's a chicken and the egg type of situation where they're trying to bring back woolly mammoths using elephants. So what makes this episode different? Well, it's the fact that we're starting to get more and more of this disclosure of information that cloning is taking place. Ectogenesis is taking place. As we said before, in vitro gametogenesis is taking place. Chimeric transhuman research is taking place. All of these types of things are now coming out into fruition. See, check it out. Welcome to the brave new world, where science fiction now fully creates humans, and you can choose your children from test tubes. This science fiction-based future is closer to reality than one might think. The designer baby de-evolution is not a futuristic event. Instead, it could take place in the next few years, and this is an article that you guys can find over at Skywatch TV. And I would definitely recommend you guys check out a lot of Tom Horn's work where he's talked about this at length. He calls these types of peoples inhumans. But that's not all that could take place in the next few years. In fact, scientists are currently working on processes that would allow for baby farming, or that's what The Guardian calls it. The lab procedure known as in vitro gametogenesis is based on allowing fertility clinics to make sperm and eggs from people's skin. Well, that's why I'm like, is this a chicken or the egg type of situation? Don't you have to have a person in order to have the skin, in order to have the sperm and the cell? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. But the article goes on to say that the process has been only tested in mice and has yet to be tested on humans. But the field is progressing so fast that the dramatic impact it could have on society must be planned now. Quote, "We try not to take a position on these issues, except to point out that before too long, we may be facing them, and we might do well to start the conversation now," said Eli Athashi, the professor of medical science at Brown University in Rhode Island. The creation of sperm and eggs from tissue has become possible because of the recent advances in which scientists have learned first to reprogram adult cells into a younger, more versatile state, and then to grow them into functioning sex cells. Just recently, in October, scientists in Japan announced for the first time the birth of baby mice from eggs made with the parents' skin. So if you haven't caught on, a lot of human life has become somewhat of an experiment, a social experiment, to where people think that they can do these types of things and there's no real moral or ethic consequences, no spiritual implications to all these types of things. Unfortunately, I have to disagree. What happens whenever we start creating these types of people, creating these creatures, bringing back these extinct buffalo, these extinct elk, all these other extinct creatures? Maybe there's a reason why they went extinct. Could it have been the impact of humans? There's all kinds of other questions we have to ask when we look at this. But how does this tie into the Nephilim? How does this tie into baby farming? Well, what happens whenever these people, because the story behind the Nephilim is that they came down upon the earth, right? And not only did they take wives for them, but they also polluted the fauna, the animals. You see, this is why we have the term chimera. This is why we have sphinx. This is why we have the manticore. You see, this is why we have the griffin and all kinds of other abnormal creatures. Because the Nephilim, the fallen angels, they came down onto the planet and not only inseminated human beings, but also animals. But we're seeing a recreation of this. So would it be far-fetched to say that some of this chimeric Nephilim fallen angel DNA could still be present in some of the actual genetic code that we have? I mean, if we're still trying to unlock our entire human genome and we're still finding out new structures within it, still, would it be a far-fetched idea to say that indeed there could be chimeric DNA in animals still? There could also be fallen angel DNA in people as well. And while we're on the topic of messing with genes, genome editing, and all kinds of other strange things like this, I think it would be important for us to highlight things like CRISPR-Cas9, the idea that they can literally cut and paste, copy and paste different genes in you. And the idea behind that is that they can give you certain genes as well through things like synthetic biology, creating artificial DNA and then inputting that into your code. And I know that sounds strange, but how strange does it sound to say that scientists are growing beating hearts? And while we also have a modern day Frankenstein who rewires frogs' brains to grow extra limbs outside of the two traditional, the arms and the legs, the four limbs that they have. And could CRISPR, the genome editing tool that we're talking about right now, could that radically affect human evolution? A primary goal in medicine is to one day be able to restore the function of damaged or missing sensory structures through the use of biological or artificial replacement components. While the vast majority of developments in limb replacements focus on artificial components, prosthetics, one doctor in Massachusetts is experimenting on frogs and other animals to develop biological restorations, and he believes he's not far from doing the same for humans. Is he a genius or Dr. Frankenstein? That's a six-legged frog we made, showing you can trigger ectopic limb formation by appropriate voltage gradients. Now I'm going to say that one more time. They're asking if this man, this doctor in Massachusetts, is a genius or a modern Frankenstein by creating a six-legged frog triggering ectopic limb formation by appropriate voltage gradients. Dr. Michael Levin, a researcher at Tufts University in Massachusetts, in an interview in Popular Science, he opens the door of his laboratory and reveals his latest developments and discoveries in biological organ replacements. Levin's primary lab subjects, for now, are frogs, tadpoles, and flatworms. And it goes on to say that an early experiment involved tadpoles whose eyes had been removed, having donor eyes implanted on their backs and connected directly to their spinal cords, resulting in the tadpoles being able to see with a lower version of eyes in the back of their head. So let that resonate with you for a second. This guy, they're debating, Dr. Michael Levin at Tufts University, they're wondering whether or not this man is a genius, or if he's just carrying on the same kind of characteristics that Dr. Frankenstein put out. See, what they're doing is they're doing whatever they want. They're choosing to do these types of things. Well, they can put eyes on the back end of a frog, because why not? They can grow 2 extra pairs of limbs for this frog, well, because why not? They can combine human and animal embryos, well, because why not? So where does this mindset go? What happens if we continue on with this breakthrough science because of, well, we can. And because science needs to know whether or not we can do these types of things. What does that mean for life? What does that mean for everything around us whenever we're seeing our entire world as one big petri dish? Is that not what these technocrats do? Is that not what these scientists do? Life, is that not the whole goal of the transhumanist agenda, but to devalue and depreciate life? You see, so what is it that we are actually dealing with? We're dealing with a malignant alchemical force that seeks to subtly weed us out and destroy us by giving us the tools to do the very same things for ourselves. And we talk about this on the show a number of times as well. Epigenetic diseases. What happens for the legacy factor? Yes, we might be creating all these abnormal things now, but what happens whenever our bodies have been so hardwired and ingrained in a natural way, so to speak, with the food that we intake, with the things that we have in our bodies, with the way that our biochemistry functions, with the way that we function in the earth? What happens whenever we start introducing these six-legged frogs? What happens whenever we start introducing these children that were grown from stem cells? You see, what happens to all of these types of things whenever we're literally forcing them upon you without actually taking the time to think about it? You see, everything has an energy field. Everything is filled with life, meaning it always vibrates differently. But what happens whenever we alter the way in which things do vibrate, the way things do operate? You see, this is what I mean by being anti-transhuman. Anti this agenda, because what they're doing is choosing to manipulate our reality, choosing to distort that which we know is normal. For the first time, biologists have succeeded in growing human stem cells in pig embryos, shifting from science fiction to the realm of the possible, the idea of developing human organs in animals for later transplant. The approach involves generating stem cells from a patient's skin, growing the desired new organ in a large animal, like a pig, and then harvesting it for transplant into the patient's body. Since the organ would be made of a patient's own cell, there would be very little risk of immune rejection. The human organ growing pigs would be examples of chimeras, animals comprised of two different genomes. They would be generated by implanting human stem cells into an early pig embryo, resulting in an animal comprised of both mixed pig and human cells. So how many times have we actually heard about this, that there were human animal pigs being grown in underground laboratories across the entire U.S.? This is nothing new. I think what is new is the fact that we have a pig embryo at 4 weeks which has been injected with human stem cells as provided by the Salk Institute. Now, for us to understand what exactly this means and what the implications of this truly has, we really have to understand what they're trying to do. Now, they tell you that it's for organ transplanting, the idea that they could grow human organs inside of a pig and then harvest those organs only to resell those organs back to you. If that doesn't sound like Dr. Frankenstein, to where you're literally becoming a patchwork person, I don't know what to tell you. The fact that's even more crazy is that we're literally creating brand new species. I mean, as I've joked about before, we already have human-pig chimeras. It's called COPS. But the idea that they're literally and scientifically going about this is much more deep. The idea, or the very reality, that we're literally creating brand new species is no longer science fiction, it has become science fact. One team of biologists, led by Zhen Wu and Juan Carlos Izpisua Belmonte at the Salk Institute, has shown for the first time that human stem cells can contribute to the forming the tissues of a pig, despite the 90 million years of evolution between the species. Another group, led by, and I'm sure I'll pronounce these names wrong, Tomoyuki Yamaguchi and Hideyuki Sato of the University of Tokyo, and Hiromitsu Nakushi of Stanford, has reversed diabetes in mice by inserting pancreas glands composed of mouse cells that were grown in a rat. The Salk Institute team's report is published in Thursday's issue of Cell, and the Stanford Tokyo team's in Wednesday's issue of Nature. So think about this, guys. What we're really talking about at this point in time is the fact that history is beginning to repeat itself. And this is, I know there's no way for me to properly convey this to you guys, the impacts of this and how explosive this kind of information is. As I said before with the Nephilim, them coming down and then polluting the entire human race, and how some of that actual DNA could be left over here within us. It could be left over within the animals as well, or maybe that was why they had the flood. But the idea that we're still revisiting things like the chimera, like the griffin, like the lamassu, like the gnu, like Pegasus, like Pixiu, like the Sphinx. You see, all of these types of chimeric creatures, these metamorphic creatures, how would you describe them? And what does that say even more so that we're now, the manticore even, that we're now experiencing these things, that we're creating them as well? Maybe there's a reason why we don't see Pegasuses flying all over the skies. Maybe there's a reason why we don't see griffins so much anymore. How long until we actually start creating dragons, if dragons were real? You see, this unlocks an entire chapter of our past that we have, if anything, deliberately shucked off because we could not comprehend it, because it was too wild. We classify these things as mythology, non-canon history, ancient archaeology, and hidden history. But what happens whenever we're recreating these same conditions today? And this is where we are in 2017. However, that's all I really have for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll have it in the description bar below. And as always, guys, stay vigilant, expose lies, and share truth. This is Noise Era, Freedom Faction, out.